Hello. So today we are continuing our discussion on mindfulness, meditation, and such. And we are going to be talking about one of the most exciting, challenging, and I think actually most rewarding aspects of mindfulness, and that is non-judgment. So, non-judgment can be quite a tricky skill to develop, and for me, I found after tons of self-reflection that one of the reasons why non-judgment was so challenging was because of a lot of the patterns that were established in my childhood. For example, just general childhood trauma. So my household, there were a lot of shaming techniques that were used to parent. And that's very common for many households. I think for me it was heightened because of the religious nature of a lot of those things. So there were a lot of moral judgments on those things. So there was very strict rules for what was right and what was wrong. But in general, even if you didn't grow up in a religious household, every person learns how to police themselves. They learn how to make sure they're in line, right? Because we have parents, guardians that are telling us, don't do this, don't do that, or you should do this, or you should do that. And so we develop, right, this kind of moral system that lives in the back of our head and tells us what things are good and what things are bad. So this is totally useful, right? In any society, there are norms and rules that make a society function. But sometimes these patterns can really just become ingrained in us, and we can start to have a really difficult time just allowing ourselves to exist because we have all of these kind of voices that are just telling us to always be evaluating and always be judging ourselves pretty harshly. Especially for me as a neurodivergent person, there can be lots of little pieces of perfectionism, thinking that you should be this way or that way. Therefore, we're stuck with these patterns of tons of self-judgment. And what I hope to communicate to you today is that this is not the only way that we can do things, right? There are more options of how we can start to view the world and view ourselves and understand this whole non-judgment thing in general and apply it to our lives, right? That's the whole thing. We want to try different things that make our lives better, make our lives more enjoyable, easier to live, etc. So I want to talk about two different things, very similar with non-judgment. The other one is equanimity. I'm going to explain that in a second, but first I want to explain what non-judgment is. So basically, non-judgment is the idea of, right, not judging something. So we're not evaluating things. We are not the judge and jury of every thought, of every sensation, of every experience that we have, evaluating whether it's good or acceptable or bad or unacceptable. We're trying to become the passive observer of our experience. Instead of having a subjective view on everything, evaluating whether things are good or bad, we're just noticing them as they are and observing them and allowing them to exist. The other word I want to bring up that's very common in meditation circles is the word equanimity. This is just a big fancy word for chill, evenness of mind. We're more balanced in our perspective, and this is especially true in high stress situations. So we're able to step into a high stress situation with a bit of evenness of our mind. This can be super difficult for some people, and for some people they're naturals at this. So this really depends on each person. But this is also a skill that we develop through meditation. So one of the things that I lied. There are two different things that I want to talk about, is how to practice non-judgment in meditation and how to practice it in life. So first, I want to discuss how to practice non-judgment in meditation specifically. So one of the first things that you want to do is to be open to all experiences. This means when you step into meditation, you're just open to whatever happens, right? So this means that you can go in and you can have a blissful, amazing experience, or you can have an experience that's kind of mundane, right? There might be nothing that happens, right? And then sometimes you might go in for meditation and you might have an awful time, a really crappy experience. But what we want to do is we want to approach each session with just a sense of openness, saying, I am going to allow for whatever kind of experience that happens, and I'm just going to let it happen. A couple of cues that you can say to yourself as you're meditating. So let's imagine you're sitting there, you're meditating, and a sensation that's uncomfortable arises. So this can be physical sensation, a thought, a flashback, or intrusive thought, whatever that is. And then you can just gently say, yes, I'm open to this thing. And then you can also say, like, this too. Like, I am open to this too. Or you can just gently say to yourself, I welcome this experience. Even if you have a little bit of resistance to that experience, I think just coaching yourself through that a little bit can definitely help make this feel a little bit better. And the next thing that you want to do is try to accept your experiences exactly as they are. So this means we're not asking our experience to change. We're not asking it to be this way or that way. A great way to do this is by noticing your breath and not changing your breath. Breath work is a really awesome practice. And we can use breath work as a form of meditation, but there's also a lot of value in just noticing your breath as it is in this moment. So you can do this literally right now. Just notice how you're breathing. Don't change your breathing at all. Is it slow? That's great. Is it fast? That's great. Is it something in the middle? That's awesome. Just notice your breath exactly as it is and accept that it is that way in the moment. Same thing with your heart. When I had really bad anxiety, my own body was a very big trigger. So sometimes I would have like heart palpitations, and that would trigger more cycles of anxiety. So one helpful thing that helped me manage a lot of my anxiety was learning to be non-judgmental to my heart rate, right? So if I was going into meditation and I was experiencing heart racing or palpitations, which is really common with anxiety, I would just try to be open to that experience. Just say, let myself know that it's okay for me to be experiencing that in this moment, and just be kind and gentle to myself. The other thing that you can do in meditation is to not go looking for anything. So not necessarily meditating with a specific goal. You're just very similar to the first one. You're just kind of going in and being open to whatever the experience is. You're not chasing any particular experience. When we're chasing something, we tend to sometimes get let down, and that can trigger some more intense emotion. So just being open is the best way to go. And the last tip is just to observe and accept different things that come up and not evaluate them, right? So when we have something that arises, we're not saying that it's good or bad, we're just allowing it to be as it is. And the next thing that I want to talk about is how we can practice equanimity and non-judgment off of the cushion, off of the meditation cushion, and in regular life. I think that one of the reasons that we practice meditation isn't just to say that we are practicing meditation, but it's to have actual benefits in our everyday life. And so when we can pool the lessons that we learn in meditation into our daily life, right? And so these are a couple of ways that we can start to really allow non-judgment to be transformational in our entire life and not just in our meditation practice. So the first thing is to practice non-judgment towards yourself. The first thing is to meet yourself where you're at. Don't ask yourself to be further along your journey than you are. Also, don't second guess yourself and think that you are further back in your journey than you actually are. You are exactly where you are for a specific reason, and understanding that and allowing that to exist and just meeting yourself in this space is a great way to practice non-judgment. The next thing is to practice self-compassion. This one is super important. So you want to be really gentle with yourself in the fact that you're suffering. The majority of people are going through life and they're dealing with a whole shit ton of suffering. Be kind, be gentle with yourself. Observe the fact that you're dealing with this suffering with a sense of understanding, right? And the other aspect of compassion is compassion doesn't just observe suffering. It also kind of motivates you to try to end the suffering as well. So being able to meet ourselves where we're at can actually give us a little bit more space to shift the suffering that we might be in. And the other thing about self-compassion is we're working to really understand our suffering completely, and we're not rejecting it in any way. We're just saying, okay, I completely accept and I fully understand my suffering. The next thing is to not evaluate your own specific emotions, sensations, or reactions as good or bad, right? This is exactly what we learned in the meditation section of this. So now you want to do it in your everyday life. If you're going through something and you notice like you're feeling sad, maybe you lost a friend, you and a friend had a fight, and now you're no longer friends. Maybe a week has gone by and you're like, man, I just can't get over this friend. What's wrong with me? Like, why am I so upset about this? Like, that person is already over it and they have new friends, so why can't I just be done with it? That is not being non-judgmental. You are definitely evaluating your experience and you're telling yourself that it's wrong for you to be feeling sad about losing that friend. It's not. There's definitely a good reason for you to feel sad, even if it takes 6 months after that friendship has ended. There's a great reason for you to be feeling the emotions that you're feeling. And when we're open to the experience of our emotions, it allows us to kind of do something with our emotions rather than just be confused as to why we're in the situation that we're in the first place. The next thing is I want to talk about how to practice non-judgment when it comes to relating with other people in our lives. So this can be friends, coworkers, parents, loved ones, even enemies, right? This is something that we need to be able to practice across the board. Or I have found it helpful to practice across the board. Nobody needs to do anything, but it's been helpful for me, and that's why I'm sharing this information with you. So what you want to do with everyone in your life, you want to lead and observe these situations with the same sense of compassion that you're working on doing to yourself. That's why it's very important to practice self-compassion, because it gives you the capacity to do it for other people as well. So we want to be able to honor everyone's suffering. We need to know that people are almost always acting in ways that are protecting themselves. They're just trying to get their needs met, and oftentimes people are just so disconnected from themselves that they have no clue. They have no clue what their needs are, and they have no clue that they're hurting people in order to get their needs met. So when we're able to lead with a sense of compassion, it makes it a little bit easier for us to understand why people are doing the things that they're doing. And it also helps us not to take things so personally, so that if someone is attacking us verbally, right, we understand that this has very little to do with you, right, and everything to do with that person and their suffering. So the next thing is to accept that person and love that person exactly as they are. So this one is especially tricky when you're dealing with a friend who is suffering. A friend or loved one. So whenever we look at someone who we love and we see them suffering, all we want to do is to make that stop. We will give them every piece of advice and try to help rescue them out of their suffering. But that person might not be ready to do that, right? We don't want to rush anybody out of their experience. The most effective way to help this thing in general is to show that person that you accept them exactly as they are. If they're in a fucked up place, that's fine. You're just there for them. You're just loving them. You're saying, I love you, even if you're really suffering and you're really struggling right now. That sends an amazing message to a person that who they are in the moment is ready to be loved. They're not ready to be loved once they've taken 5 steps in the direction that you want them to go. Like right now, in this moment, you are accepting them and you are loving them. And the last aspect of non-judgment towards others is to practice deep, deep listening. Understand the people in your life. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been a family therapist, and I've heard parents just be so confused as to why their kids are in the position that they're in. And I'm like, you have not listened to this kid. They've been trying to tell you so many things about themselves, and you've just been ignoring it and placing your own subjective opinion onto them. Stop it. Everybody stop. Pay attention to what that person is saying. Listen deeply to that person. Understand their needs fully before you're trying to do anything else, right? And we're not understanding their needs so we can help them change. We're understanding their needs so that we can love them in the moment, right? That is how we transform our relationships, guys. This is how we find real connection with others. Yeah. I'm talking about these things very briefly, but I promise you, if you take these practices to heart, they will transform your relationships with the people in your life. Just test it out and then come back and let me know if it worked or not, but it is massively effective. And okay, so that's all of that there is for non-judgment towards others. And lastly, I want to talk about how to be non-judgmental towards your environment or your situation. I find this one pretty tricky because sometimes we can be in some pretty awful situations. Yeah, so let's, I'm gonna give you all a couple of tips to help you practice this sense of non-judgment in your environment. So one of the first things that I want you to do is practice radical acceptance towards this thing. So one thing that we get worried about when we practice radical acceptance, we worry that if we accept our situation, that it means that we'll remain stuck there forever. What I would like to challenge you with is the idea that radical acceptance actually helps you fully comprehend and understand the situation in a way that actually allows you to move forward. I find that when people aren't having radical acceptance towards a situation, their attention is in a lot of different places, and they're not putting their energy in the present moment, because we need our energy in the present moment because that's the only place that we can move from, right? So don't draw it from the future or the past or anywhere else. Just try to be present with yourself in this shitty situation as much as possible. Really take a look around and see exactly where you're at and evaluate it. And I know that we're talking about not evaluating, but for your situation, it's important for you to really kind of like take a full assessment of everything and just observe it with a little bit of compassion, because we're doing that with everything, right? And the next thing that we want to do is to be to remember that we're on a journey. So sometimes we will find ourselves in situations that we don't like to be in. It's just a fact of life that often happens. So be very patient with yourself. If you are finding yourself in a really difficult situation, try to be as kind to yourself as possible. And my last tip is to make sure that you are really, like I've mentioned several times, you're really being compassionate towards yourself in the experience of your suffering in that shitty environment, right? So like I've mentioned before, compassion is super important because when we have a full awareness of where we're at, when we have a full idea of our position in this life and our position in our suffering, when we start to use the little bit of compassion that we do have, that compassion is an active word. It's not a passive word. So it motivates us towards action because we want to help ourselves get our needs met. So that's pretty much all I want to say about this topic. I really appreciate you sticking with me through this whole thing. And I hope that these tools are beneficial to you because they are really transformational. I really do challenge you to give these things a shot. And this all goes back to why meditation is so helpful and so useful. It's not just this thing that you do all the time. It actually has so many valuable lessons that it can teach you. And so that's why I'm having this conversation with you in the first place. So I invite you to try these things out, see if they work for you. And my last note is I would really enjoy for you to come and join our Facebook group. We're talking about mindfulness this week, and each week we're discussing different topics in terms of health, emotional health, and spiritual wellness. So come on over there. The link will be below, and you can join in with us on this awesome journey that you're on. Thank you so much for showing up with me and showing up for yourself. I will see you next time. Peace and love. Adios.